Okay, letter 25. The real trouble about the set your patient is living in is that it is merely Christian. They all have individual interests, of course, but the bond remains mere Christianity. What we want, if men become Christians at all, is to keep them in the state of mind I call Christianity and. You know, Christianity and the crisis, Christianity and the new psychology, Christianity and the new order, Christianity and faith healing, Christianity and psychical research, Christianity and vegetarianism, Christianity and spelling reform. If they must be Christians, let them at least be Christians with a difference. Substitute for faith itself some fashion with Christian coloring. Work on their horror of the same old thing. The horror of the same old thing is one of the most valuable passions we have produced in the human heart, an endless source of heresies in religion, folly in counsel, infidelity in marriage, and inconsistency in friendship. The humans live in time and experience reality successively. To experience much of it, therefore, they must experience many different things. In other words, they must experience change. And since they need the change, the enemy, being a hedonist at heart, has made change pleasurable to them, just as he has made eating pleasurable. But since he does not wish them to make a change any more than eating an end itself, he has balanced the love of change in them with a love of permanence. He has contrived to gratify both tastes together in a very world he has made by the union of change and permanence, which we call rhythm. He gives them the seasons, each season different, yet every year the same, so that spring always felt as a novelty, yet always the same reoccurrence, if of an immemorial theme. He gives them in his church a spiritual year. They change from a fast to a feast, but it's the same feast as before. Now, just as we pick out and exaggerate the pleasure of eating to produce gluttony, so we pick out this natural pleasantness of change and twist it to demand it for absolute novelty. This demand is entirely our workmanship. If we neglect our duty, men will not only be contented, but transported by the mixed novelty and familiarity of snowdrops this January, sunrise this morning, plum pudding this Christmas. Children, until we have taught them better, will be perfectly happy with a seasonal round of games in which conkers succeed hopscotch as regularly as autumn follows summer. Only by our incessant efforts is the demand for infinite or unrhythmical change kept up. So what he's saying is that humans have been given the ability to accept change because change comes every year, like with the seasons or with a calendar. Or we get into this habit of doing the same routine of things. Like we play this game this day and that game the next day. And then like think about like sports seasons. We know we have baseball, football, basketball year after year. And so we find comfort in that. And so he's saying that they need to keep people wanting more, wanting different, not getting settled in that comfort of routine. This demand is valuable in various ways. In the first place, it diminishes pleasure while increasing desire. The pleasure of novelty is by its very nature more subject than any other to the law of diminishing returns. And continued novelty costs money, so that the desire for it spells avarice or unhappiness or both. And again, the more rapacious this desire, the sooner it must eat up all the innocent sources of pleasure and pass on to those the enemy forbids. Thus, by inflaming the horror of the same old thing, we have recently made the arts, for example, less dangerous to us than perhaps they have been, lowbrow and highbrow artists alike, being now daily drawn into fresh and still fresh excess of lasciviousness, unreason, cruelty, and pride. Finally, the desire for novelty is indispensable if we are to produce fashions or vogues. The use of fashions in thought is to distract the attention of men from their real dangers. We direct the fashionable outcry of each generation against those vices of which it is least in danger, and fix its approval on the virtue nearest to that vice which we are trying to make endemic. In the game is to have them all running about with fire extinguishers whenever there is a flood, and all crowding to that side of the boat which is really nearly gunwale under. Thus, we make it fashionable to expose the dangers of enthusiasm at the very moment when they are all really becoming worldly and lukewarm. In a century later, when we are really making them all Byronic and drunk with emotion, the fashionable outcry is directed against the dangers of the mere understanding. Cruel ages are put on their guard against sentimentality, feckless and idle ones against respectability, lecherous ones against Puritanism, and whenever all men are really hastening to be slaves or tyrants, we make liberalism the prime bogey. But the greatest triumph of all is to alleviate this horror of the same old thing into a philosophy, so that nonsense in the intellect may reinforce corruption in the will. It is here that the general evolutionary or historical character of modern European thought, partly our work, comes in so useful. The enemy loves platitudes. Of a proposed course of action, he wants men, so far as he can see, as to ask very simple questions. Is it righteous? Is it prudent? Is it possible? Now, if we can keep men asking, is it in accordance with the general movement of our time? Is it progressive or reactionary? Is this the way that history is going? They will neglect the relevant questions, and the questions they do ask are, of course, unanswerable, for they do not know the future, and what the future will be depends very largely on just those choices, which they now invoke the future to help them to make. As a result, while their minds are buzzing in this vacuum, we have the better chance to slip in and bend them to the action we have decided on. And great work has already been done. Once they know some changes were for the better and others for the worse and others again indifferent, we have largely removed this knowledge. For the descriptive adjective unchanged, we have substituted the emotional adjective stagnant. We have trained them to think that the Father as a promised land, think of the future, as a promised land which favored heroes attain, not as something which everyone reaches at the rate of 60 minutes per hour. Whatever he does, whoever he is, your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. So we want them to want change, but then as things are changing, we want them to dread them. It keeps this kind of confused state going. And then we change adjectives, he says. So instead of something being unchanged, meaning it's staying the same, we change the word for that and make it stagnant. So stagnant, like when I think of stagnant, I think of stagnant water, which is where mosquitoes breed. It's that like gross water that just sits still and gets slimy and gross on top. So it has a negative connotation. So what he's saying is that we want them to just not know what they want, because if they're confused, then we can help control what's going on in their mind.